Well, hello. Welcome, everybody, to the first instalment of the Radiator Arms. It did occur to me we should probably get a theme tune done at some point because, we're surrounded by all this wonderful instrumentation and everything. So, for this episode, we'll probably just have to go a bit ska, bebop, like improvise something. Welcome to the Radiator Arms. Grab yourself a drink, come and sit down. Join me and Ant and Will in the Radiator Arms. I admit it needs some work. And my training was more in the sort of film and not really at all in the world of music.
Listen, I think if I go into Logic Pro, I put the auto-tune on, I think we'll be absolutely fine. I can make you sound good. I can make you a star.
We could do that. We could do nice mid-2000s auto-tune fest.
Yes, we'll get Ant on harmonies as well.
No, come on. This is like 2025. You just get AI to do it all for you. I mean, that's how we came up with the name, the Radiator Arms, to be fair.
That's true. He's got a history of music, but that is for, I think, at least season 4. Anyway, we should give a little bit of background. Now, there's a few of you listening that might already know myself. I'm James, otherwise known to many as JM, because annoyingly there's another much more famous James Martin out there who likes his cars that knackered any possibility of me using my real name for what I do. We are joined here, for those watching, to my left by Ant of Sports and Touring, and also JM and Friends. Say hello, Ant.
Hello, Ant.
Because not everybody is watching, some are listening. And we are also joined for the first time in any capacity by my good friend, Will.
Hello, everyone.
Also known as Will the Plank.
Yes.
And we're sticking with that, aren't we?
I've had that as an Xbox Live gamer tag since 2004, and I still haven't been able to think of anything better. And yeah, I'm just going with it. I see no reason to change it. Even though I'm nearing my mid-30s, I'm still not going to change it.
Nearing your mid-30s. How dare you? I am at the mid-30 point, and we'll not ask you.
I'm in my 50s, so, still looking fresh.
Do you know, I think my grandmother was relishing the notion of her 80th birthday, because up until that point she'd been, I'm in my 70s, don't you know? And then the moment the candles are blown out, I'm in my 80s, don't you know? She loved that because of all the, I think, sympathy that it brought her. Anyway, so the aim for this is to deliver a weekly podcast, if we can manage it, on the topic chiefly of cars, but we also have other shared interests as well, and it can, after a few years, get boring talking about just cars. So we got things like movies, music, video games, and other media and tech stuff that we also want to do. Will and myself became sort of quite good friends, chiefly actually not just through cars. We got to know each other through cars, but we've then talked a lot more recently about tech stuff, and we've both developed a bit of a fondness for old consoles. Yes.
Right here, for those watching at home, there is a Sega Dreamcast that you kind of gave me, because it was broken, but you kind of gave me.
Yeah.
And now I am spending a lot of money doing up to make it all fancy.
See, that's what friends do. They give other friends things that they're going to have to spend lots and lots of money on to make work. Do you want to know something? This is why this is all such an interconnected world. I actually won my first Dreamcast.
Which is possibly this one, isn't it?
It might be that one. The truth is, I had 2 Dreamcasts, and over the last sort of, 2.5 decades, basically, I've sort of lost track of which is which. But there is a possibility it's that one. And I won it in 1999, when the Dreamcast was a fancy, flashy new thing. And I won it doing Fantasy Formula 1.
No way.
Yeah, no, that's true. With a company called Special Reserve, that was a sort of mail order thing that you would get. It's only about probably 20 or 30 pages, and it was just I call it online. It started off as phone-in old school mail order for video games and the like. And it was just like one page, here's all the PlayStation games, one page, here's the Nintendo games and so on. And, that's how I did my Christmas presents, was just going through it, circling everything that I wanted, which was basically half the magazine. And they ran a Fantasy Formula 1 competition. And I'm pretty confident that I chose Mika Hakkinen, because at that time he was kind of, the boss. He was doing everything well. But I'd also spent basically all of my points getting Mika on my team. And I then went with a second driver whose name escapes me, but there was a definite backmarker, but it was all I could afford after getting Mika. And then one race, the backmarker happened to get some points, and I got a Dreamcast out of it. And I remember very, very vividly, it was April 1999. My grandfather had just died unexpectedly, and my parents took me out for a Chinese, and were like, "Yeah, by the way, James, here's a letter. You've won something." And yeah, it was a Dreamcast, and I was absolutely ecstatic. So yeah, which was nice.
Memories. But you know what I'm thinking, though? Many people who have tuned in today probably would have came here from either your newsletter, which if you aren't signed up for that, make sure you do. We'll leave a link in the description.
Yep.
And might have come here from JM and Friends or JM on Cars. And they're probably thinking, what about the car stuff? So maybe we'll start there and we'll come back to the Dreamcast stuff. And there is a particular topic that you had in mind for today.
Yes, I did. Well, we did spend a little bit of time sort of spitballing ideas. And the great thing about having a first episode of a new idea is that we have basically everything at our fingertips to talk about. And I thought, let's be really, really simple here. And for our first episode, let's talk about our first cars. So I think we should start with you, Ant, because, you know, you came first. So what was your first car?
Well, it depends if you mean the first car that I was responsible for or the first car that I bought. So actually, I'll start with the first car I was responsible for.
I think we've got time for both.
All right, so when I was 18, my dad decided to leave the country, go back to Trinidad, and I stayed here to go to uni, and he had an old 1977 Toyota Corolla liftback. And it was in this sort of royal metallic blue. I can't remember the exact colour code at the time. Rear-wheel drive, 1.6 litre. I can't remember if it had 4 or 5 gears. I just don't really recall. But that thing was a death trap. Absolute death trap. It had these little skinny tyres, worse than a Prius. And the chassis was terrible and it was old and heavy. And I ended up binning it in a rainstorm.
Oh no!
Thanks to the 0 driver aids going round a bend, and it just aquaplaned at the rear and met with a lamppost. Bit like a recent F40 incident.
Oh dear, we'll get onto that later. Now, how old was the car at the time? What period are we talking about?
Yeah, the car was 77, and this was in 1990.
Okay,
so it was 13 years old at the time.
And of course, people now always talk about old cars with such, you know, misty eyes and fondness, but they also forget that once upon a time, a car lasting 13 years was an achievement.
Oh, it was a Toyota, though. Come on.
It was a Toyota.
It just started every time. And it was the first car that I ended up just having to do my own maintenance on. I'd done some work on cars before that with my dad. He had an old Wolseley, I forget which one, that we basically spent a few years restoring. But yeah, just like, you know, ended up having to change my brake pads and all that stuff myself because I was a poor student and very poor student. In fact, not long after that, I became homeless. So that car, kind of when that car came to its end, I couldn't afford to do anything about it. So ended up getting sort of carted away for scrap, sadly.
Oh dear. There's something a bit cool about those early Celicas. I mean, they're very much of their time.
Corolla.
Corolla. Because they did also do a Celica at the time, and they did then the Celica Supra came a little bit afterwards, and then the Celica and Supra kind of split into separate model lines. They're very, very awesome things. But yeah, old Corollas. I don't think Toyota UK, funnily enough, have a 1977 Corolla liftback. But if they did, it'd probably be in a dark corner. They've got an LFA. And I have a strict policy of every time I ask Toyota for anything, I ask for a go in the LFA, knowing full well that I don't think it's actually been outside other than to be moved from one unit to the other since before COVID. Rumour has it a very wealthy footballer offered to buy it off them, and they said no.
Weren't they very low in production? I was only 300 or something like that for the LFA?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's one of those cars that when they came out, £300,000, and everybody said, for that, no, because it took, 10 years to produce it. And so by the time it came out, that the numbers and that weren't all that amazing, and people said, 300 odd grand for a, tarted up Toyota, no thank you very much. And of course now they're worth nearly £1 million. And I think they are seriously cool. That's on my bucket list. And I hope it's one of those cars that won't disappoint. Anyway, Will, your first car.
Right. So are we talking first car before or after I passed my test?
No, let's go back to the roots.
Let's go back to the roots. When I was 17, somebody not far from here gave me a Rover 418 diesel.
Ooh.
It was an MREG, M821 RBM, if I remember correctly. It had about 170,000 miles on the clock. It had no MOT. It barely had any lacquer left on the body. It was ropey, but it was mine.
Will, you seem to have a history of friends giving you things that are broken.
Yeah.
Yes. I've always been somebody who's liked fixing stuff, very mechanically minded, electronics and things as well. Comes from my father. My father was an engineer in the 60s with EMI and things like that, and he had a lot of electronic training. Worked on some of the first brain scanners as well. So when I was growing up, there's always stuff to tinker about. You guys saw downstairs here where we are at my studio, and I think one of the first words you said was, "Wow, I didn't know you fixed that as well." And we're like, "Yes." So I always wanted to play with cars from a young age, and it made sense that my first car needed some work. It was blue, and it did run mostly okay. It ran a bit worse for a while. After I played with it, but then we got a mechanic friend to help, and then I learned, don't do that. Maybe you should probably do that correctly. But yeah, it was good. It was the first thing Actually, no, it's not the first car I ever drove. The first car I ever drove was a Hyundai Accident.
Okay.
Sorry,
right.
what?
Yeah, I have never even heard of the Hyundai Accident.
Sorry, the Hyundai Accent.
Accent, right.
I've just referred to it as a Hyundai Accident for so long because it's just not the most ideal car I think anybody's ever owned.
I don't think anybody's ever grown up lusting after an Accent.
No, but it was an interesting experience to drive manual. I remember somebody was teaching me to drive it, and I couldn't get it into reverse, but that was because the reverse didn't work on the gearbox. The gearbox was broken, and neither did third. So I'm sitting there trying to turn around. It's on this land as well. There's a lorry coming towards me, and I'm trying to get this thing in reverse. And they're like, "Well, we're going to have to get out and push it." So here I am at 13 years old, driving manual for the first time, still not knowing really how to use a clutch. I'm having to get out of the car and push it so a lorry can come by.
Oh, no. So we're currently in a undisclosed rural part of East Anglia, and one of the first jobs I got when I moved here was working for a local sports car specialist. And they very kindly put me on their insurance, basically so that they could use me as a dog's body to get stuff done. But, I didn't care. I was in my very early 20s, and to be given almost unlimited access to a garage full of very nice cars was just amazing. And one of the first things they got me to do was, I was actually there. I hadn't even agreed to work for them. And they said, "You've got your license on you, haven't you?" I was like, "Yeah." "Is it clean?" "Yeah." And they said, "Can you come and help us just bring a car back from some paintwork or something like that?" And it turned out to be a 993 generation 911 Carrera.
Oh, wow.
Which I always thought, wow, this is amazing. Now, at this point in time, they were worth a lot less than they are now. So probably somewhere in the high 20s, something like that, maybe even into the 30s. But at that point in time, that might as well have been £1 million, because I did not have 20 grand. I did not have 10 grand, 2 or 3 grand to buy a car was kind of where I was at. And I was driving this thing through some of these tight little country lanes and doing okay and really enjoying, being in a Porsche. And then this car came around the corner, and we both came to a stop, but I was kind of in the middle of the road, and there was a little lay-by that I just passed, and I needed to get into it, but I didn't know where reverse was. I hadn't checked, I hadn't looked. So, and also the visibility wasn't great. The wing mirrors weren't maybe set quite right for reversing, and this is somebody else's car. This is the first time I've been trusted with a car by a company. And so I was spending some time just working out, okay, how do I get this into reverse? I want to make sure I don't reverse it into a bank, because that'll probably, ruin my prospects of working for these people. And by the time I worked out where reverse was, the other car decided that there was room to get past me, and then drove past me with about an inch of room and a series of expletives thrown out the window, because they thought it was my car and I just didn't know how to drive it, which I took to be a great compliment, because I thought clearly this spotty 21-year-old has not bought themselves a Porsche. But still I like that, and I think for many people the first car they've really got fond memories of is not the first one that they owned. I didn't own a car until I was 19. I got my license on the 26th of December, I think. No, 28th of December, sorry. 2006, I want to say.
That makes me feel so old.
Yeah. I'll not ask you when you got yours, don't worry. And
1990.
yeah, so
Before I was born.
Oh no!
Thanks,
oh, you
Wes.
had to, didn't you? You had
I
to.
did, sorry.
I was alive. So there you go. I'll make you feel a little bit better. The very first car I drove, I can't actually remember what it was, but I do remember where I drove it. Now, I probably did a little bit the sort of typical, sat on your dad's knee, like, here, press this, around the
Yes,
driveway. Because
we
when
all
I was
did.
younger, we had like an unreasonably large driveway for the size of house, just because it was just like tiny little development that used to be like a really big house, and then someone sold their garden. So we had the driveway of a nice house, but it wasn't a flashy house. Anyway, where I first actually drove a car properly was Brands Hatch Grand Prix circuit. They did, and I believe they still do, MSV do a young driver thing.
Yep.
So, and I think you can do it from as young as about 13 or so.
That's right.
And I was, I believe, 15 or 16. So thankfully it wasn't like I was going to get a taste of driving and then, sorry, you've got to wait another 4 years. But I got to drive it. And I think the other kids in the car were about 13 and they struggled reaching the pedals. They were a bit terrifying. But I did that, and that was really cool. And to have my first ever driving experience being on the loop of the GP circuit at Brands Hatch was...
They did the full GP.
Well, no. We had the loop. So what was happening? There was an event going on Brands Hatch Indy.
Right.
And then the bit that makes up the GP loop,
Right.
we were able to use, because I know the locals get a bit upset about the noise, but I don't think anybody's going to notice like a Clio or something sort of, ditzing about at 15 mile an hour. So yeah, that was that. The first license I had was actually my bike license, because I employed some logic. My parents, I will give them some credit. My grandfather had been killed in a motorcycle accident. My dad was very, very big into bikes, and I can understand perfectly, especially now I'm a bit older, why they were so conflicted about me having a bike license. But I think my father actually, to give him some credit, took what I think is maybe the best approach to it, where he decided, okay, if you're really going to get into this, what we're going to do is we're going to get you a proper training. We're going to make sure that you've got a decent, education to get on a bike. And we're also going to make sure that you have the proper safety kit and everything else. And so, it was like new jacket, new boots, like get all the, decent gloves, all that sort of stuff. And then for my 17th birthday, also bought me a new scooter. And I made the decision. He said, look, you can have basically, kind of whatever you want if it's a scooter, because they're a lot cheaper than a motorbike. And I had a choice. I decided I wanted a Gilera Runner, and they did either a 125 or they did a 200. The 125 I could have ridden on my 17th birthday, but the 200 I needed a license for. But once I had the license, it's going to be a lot better. So I opted for that, got my bike license, and I got my bike license first because I reasoned. My grandmother actually paid for my bike license. Why she did, I don't know, but she did. And I knew that my parents would then decide me having a car license was very worthwhile, so I could pick them up from the pub. Whereas if I already had a car license, there was no need for me to have a bike license. So I did it that way around. So I spent my first kind of couple of years driving other cars. But the first one I spent any sort of time in was Dad had a Mitsubishi Warrior on the company policy. And the Warrior is one of those cars, a bit like the Outlander PHEV that they did a few years later, that existed and sold only because it was a loophole car. So the Warrior was functionally a pickup truck, double cab pickup truck, but it managed to sneak through as a van. It classified as a commercial vehicle, which meant that you didn't pay VAT on it. You could insure it as a commercial vehicle, and it was on the commercial vehicle insurance policy. So whereas I think at the time, Audi A4, 2-litre diesel that was technically Dad's company car, I couldn't go near until I was, a lot older. The Warrior, well, anyone could drive it because it was on the same policy as the VANS. So I went from going around on a scooter, being effectively only a very small step up from cyclists in terms of, road hierarchy, to suddenly being the king of the road. I was not used to other road traffic stopping for me.
Well, you were in a tank.
Yeah, that's it. I went from being in a scooter where people would take liberties and they would pull out in front of you because they either didn't see you or didn't care, to being in a slightly dented pickup truck. And people were just terrified of you. I loved it. It was fantastic.
I was going to say, in a Warrior, surely you can even see the guy on the scooter anyway because it was so high up.
And you probably couldn't feel them when you ran them over.
Well,
either.
exactly.
No. Oh, it was wonderful. I loved that so much. And then the second vehicle I spent any degree of time in was Grandad's Astra van, because Nan had promised that when I got my license, she would put me on the insurance for the van. And true to her word, she did. I mean, typically, as soon as I got my license, I was on the phone going like, right, put me on the insurance now. And then the next day, I think I was. And then, for about a month, I used that to go to school and back, which was lovely because it was freezing cold. So the novelty of being able to get to school indoors, and have heat and everything was great.
Also, the Mark IV Astra platform that was based on was actually pretty decent anyway. So as far as the first proper kind of thing to actually be able to borrow and call your own for a while, you could do a lot worse than a Mark IV Astra van.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, I've still got it, and I love driving it. And looking at reviews from the time, what people really liked about the Astra van was that it was, as it says on the tin, an Astra van. It just drives like a car.
Yeah.
It's just got no back seats.
I've had 3 Mark IV Astras and they all ended up dying spectacularly of engine failure. But while they were working, I did really like them. Up until that point.
Oh, okay. So enough of me. And so you had the Corolla. What came next?
Now, this was one of those moments for me. My first time, I finished uni, I got my first job, I was getting a reasonable income, and I thought, I'm going to buy myself a car, and I want something a bit sporty.
Okay.
I was walking along, I saw this car, it was beautiful, it was red. To me, it was like a Ferrari. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It was a Mark I Ford Mondeo, 2-litre SI. Absolutely loved that car. Drove it around thinking I was in a Ferrari because it was this beautiful red. Bought it for £7,500 in 1996, 95 maybe, thereabouts.
That's a fair bit of money.
Yeah.
Was that that was the current Mondeo at the time?
It was the first ever Mondeo. Yeah, Mark I, and because it was only about 3 years old. I can't remember exactly how old it was. Hang on, might have been 95, 96 thereabouts. I bought it. I love that car, and because it was the SI, of course, that meant it must have been really sporty. And I loved that car, and I sort of drove to the place that I worked in it every day feeling like I was like $1 million, even though it was, I mean, at the time, $7,500 in the mid-90s was a fair chunk of cash.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But for me, given where I literally just come from, I went through a bit of a very, very rough patch while I was at uni, struggling to find somewhere to live and have somewhere to live, to the point where I had a job, and I think I bought a house at that point as well, and was able to buy my first car with my own money. It was just such an epic moment. But that car was great. It had these tiny little, by today's standards, I think it was 13 or 14 inch. No, there was 16s. That was it. 16-inch alloys.
Oh, they were alloys though.
Yeah. Oh, they were alloys. Yeah.
That was quite big in kind of the 90s. 16-inch alloys are quite
I'm pretty
the size.
sure they were. They might have been 15s actually.
Okay.
15s, I think, because I had another car after that, which I think was on 16s. But and I loved that car. I drove it everywhere, and I thought it was brilliant. And I kept reading all the fast forward magazines and had all these grand plans for what I was going to do to the car, which I didn't do because I was married and wasn't allowed to spend money on a car.
Oh.
See, the thing is, I can imagine then, as you said, mentioning what you'd come through and the things you'd gone through, that first kind of nice car that you purchased yourself, it must have been such a good feeling.
Oh, mate, you have no idea. It was one of those situations where I needed some milk. I could have walked across the road. Oh no, I'm getting in my car and I'm driving to Cambridge, because that's where the best milk is, obviously,
Exactly. Yeah.
It's exactly the same carton of milk, but no, it was a brilliant car. I didn't really do too much in it. I just needed a car to get mainly to and from work. But I've always loved cars. Like I don't remember not loving cars. Like when I was a very, very young, like 3 years old, I'd already accumulated a huge collection of Matchbox toy cars, and smuggled them, into the suitcase on family holidays. Got stopped by security. What on earth is going on inside this bag? It turns out to be this, like, literally, I don't know, about 2 kilos worth of Matchbox toys. So I'd always been that kid who loved cars, and just the idea of being able to buy something that was just a little bit sporty was, for me, it was just like I said, for me at the time, it felt like I just bought a Ferrari.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going back to one of the things of, like, as I said, how you're feeling buying that. It doesn't matter what kind of car it is. It's a car that is so special to you. It doesn't matter if it's got 10 horsepower, it's got 100. When you look at it out the window, you think, I've worked hard for that car. Yep. It is the best thing. I don't care what they have on the neighbour's driveway. That is the best car there ever is.
Yeah, the difference is that it was the best car.
Exactly.
Mondeos are actually really, really good cars.
I have a soft spot for Mondeo too,
Now, honestly, I test drove. I mean, obviously, I know it's front wheel drive and everything, but at the time, I test drove, was it a 3 Series, and I just had more fun just generally driving the Mondeo than I did the 3 Series at the time. Don't know why. It was just...
There it is.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, no, that's the second. That's the Mark II.
That's the second one, is it?
Yeah,
that was the second one. Yeah.
So, and I noticed also the Glyn Hopkin courtesy micro. So for those who are just listening, we've got in the background here a Mac screen just playing a random montage of different stuff. I'll have to edit in the photo. And so clearly Red Mondeos was a thing.
Well, after the first one, I had to have a second one. But we'll come on to that. I'll tell you more about that, because that was actually quite a funny thing.
So, interestingly, on the screen there is my Volkswagen Transporter van that I had. Now, I didn't pass my test actually till I was about 22. One of the reasons for that is struggling musician, of course, is that I always had somebody to take me out in a car, because I've been working with my dad since I was 16. And I could always afford to buy a really rubbish car and tinker on it. That's how I learnt all my mechanical knowledge of fixing things, replacing stuff. It's just having some cheap box to tinker on. And the vehicle that we always had that when my own car was broken, because of course it was our Volkswagen Transporter van. My dad bought that from Ipswich in I think it was 2000, for about $3,500. It was an ex-delivery van, but we had that for 20 years, that thing. That was the first vehicle I properly learned to drive in. So, I said that Hyundai accident, as I called it earlier. That was just a first kind of a few days of just going up and down to drive. But yeah, when I was 17, that was the first thing I was properly driving, and it was great. That's why I've always loved vans. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sure you both enjoy driving vans quite a lot, right?
I love vans. I have a soft spot for vans, partly because Dad's company fleet was chiefly vans. Mostly, actually, he developed a fondness for the Fiat Ducato.
Really?
Yeah, for various different reasons. It was available in the configuration that suited his business the most. He had tried various other different brands of van. I remember he bought a Sprinter at one point because they tried to make vans a bit sexy. So it's like a 200 horsepower Sprinter. 200 horsepower in a van is quite a lot. It was the worst thing they ever bought. It was constantly broken. So later on they did change and try a few different things, but yeah, if ever I needed to move house, which I did quite a bit when I was younger, or just help a friend out or something like that, or run errands for him, I would borrow a van. And he gave me white van man driving lessons, how to, when you go to a fuel station, not run over the pumps as you leave, because you've now got something that's a lot bigger than what you'll be used to with much worse visibility. How to then eat your sandwich and drive at the same time to maximize the available time that you've got.
How about how to cut people up as well?
Oh yes, a variety of different gestures to be able to articulate to your fellow road users how you feel about them. I loved my time in vans.
I hate vans. I just a few times in my life I've had to rent vans, and I'm like, I'd rather just hire someone to drive the van. Like, I just don't like the high seating position, you know, the steering like this. I don't even know how to put that into words, but where your arms are moving forward and backwards rather than left to right. No, I don't like it. And in fact, this is one of the things that I don't like about a lot of current cars is just how high you sit in them. I want to sit low, and being in a van is like the worst of all worlds for me.
It's interesting you mentioned that because James, you've had the what was it, the Coupe Reborn,
yes,
which you've been testing and doing a review on, and you very kindly put me on the press insurance.
Yes,
I only drove it for about 15 minutes. One of my first comments, because I was driving along, I was going, "This seat is really high," and I just couldn't get down. And the first things I said was, "It's got quite a high driving position. I feel like my head is in the ceiling." And you were like,
I did, after you got out of it, get in it and realise that the seat was raised by about 2 inches.
That might also do it.
Yeah.
Oh, but I think generally
I think you might not be used to electric seat adjustment.
Are you trying to say that I'm a man who has poor, knackered, old cars? Because you're correct.
Yes.
Yes, my newest vehicle is 23 years old.
To be fair, I've gone through phases, because also you find when you start out with sort of, you know, basic entry level kind of cheaper end of the market vehicles, they'll all have manual adjustment. Then as they get nicer, you know, more luxurious and so on, electric adjustment will come back in. But then when you get to, say, like supercars and things, well, the optional seats are the fancy lightweight buckets, and you're back to manual adjustment again. And I get really annoyed if I get in a car that's got, say, like Aston love doing this. The lightweight bucket carbon fibre seats they have electric motors in them. You go, why? What's the blooming point?
I was going to say, surely that defeats the whole purpose of a lightweight seat, to have motors.
It very much does. Because the motor's way more than the seat does. It's ridiculous. But you know, vans, I got a real thing for. I'll tell you a good story. So close to where we are, there is a very large hill as you exit the town. And once upon a time, my dad was trying to get home in his van, and at the time, it was an old school rear wheel drive van. And of course, the problem with those is if there's no load in the back, they have no traction. It had been very cold, and it was snowing, and he'd hit the traffic lights when they were red, tried to get off the line, but it just wasn't working. So the traction was so poor, he just left it in first and got out and pushed it. And luckily managed to get back in it and then get up the hill. But yeah.
I just realised I do actually have one fan story, which is something that's kind of fond memories for me, and that was my dad. He was a welder, and he had a small independent subcontracty type company, and it was either just him or him and 2 other people most of the time. And he had this absolutely ancient Bedford van. It was just very big and very scary. I can't remember how old it was, but I'm pretty sure. So this was in the 80s. So that I'm pretty sure it would have been like a van from the early 70s.
Was it a Dormobile or something like that?
I don't know. I'll have to look it up and see if I can dig out something that I recognise. And if I find one, we'll stick it over
For
the
an
top
old
of the
riot van or something.
Over the top of the video. But yeah, and because I used to basically work for him in the school holidays and stuff, mostly sweeping out the factory or cleaning up the swarf and all that stuff. Until I started to learn to weld a bit later. But yeah, we used to go everywhere in that van when we were going on jobs. And but the thing was, it didn't have any seatbelts.
Oh.
Had no seatbelts fitted. And it just had this you had the driver's seat, and then it had this sort of bench kind of thing that you just sat on. And I think he'd managed to put in some lap strap things in there or something like that just didn't work very well. And yeah, so it's a pretty scary thing. And I think at the time you could get away with that. If the vehicle was not fitted from new with the seatbelts, then you could be in it without a seatbelt. So that'd be me and my dad out on these jobs, going to, put in some railings or go to a construction site with no seatbelt and this van that rattled and bounced along the road like like there was nobody's business.
I probably shouldn't say this, but I spent an awful lot of time in the back of vans. Like not in like strange situations like that, but in like James, the look on James's face right now is one of pure terror.
No, it's nostalgia.
Nostalgia.
No, because I did too. Is this microphone falling down, by the way?
I think it is.
I was going to say you're drooping a little bit there, James.
I know. Sorry about that, lads.
I think it's suffering with old age.
Yeah, aren't we all?
Right, hang on. I've got a lovely set of grits
lovely.
out.
You do that. Don't forget to get the sound by the microphone for the for the Archers fans at home. Here, while you're doing that, I'll also make it really authentic, and I'll now have some water, darling.
And if you're listening, that definitely is water. Because these days you can't, it's all in cans, isn't it, for recycling purposes?
Yeah, it is. I've tried cans of water. This is a Cano water, and I have had cartons of water, and I quite like the can because if I'm aggrieved for whatever reason at the end of the day, I can just sort of take some of these out of the recycling and just stamp on them and then feel a lot better. No, the Astrovan that you both know. I was carted about in the back of that probably more than I was in the front of it.
Same.
And nobody really seemed to think there was anything wrong with that.
No, I had a little beanbag I sat on, and this
beanbag?
A beanbag, I know,
You
luxury.
flash git.
To be fair though, I was surrounded by lots of tall, heavy PA equipment. So had we had an accident of some sort, it definitely would have crushed me. But I didn't mind because it was nice to lean upon. So I had it as a backrest as well. I was proper flash.
Do you know what's the best bit, right? Is I think I can say this now because he's been dead for 26 years. My grandfather was an MOT tester, and he did tell me how he'd thought about putting, seatbelts and maybe a seat in the back of the van for us kids. But if he did it, he'd have to do it properly. So he just didn't.
I'm just thinking right now, Ben, our friend Ben from Dad Cars, is probably having an absolute fit at the moment, thinking about...
I hope you're having kittens.
Yeah, absolute kittens, because obviously he's so hot on safety and child seats and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
Meanwhile,
none of this Swedish rated stuff. Just slings them all in the back of a van loose.
Yeah.
Because if there's enough kids, there basically won't be any room for them to move, so it's probably safer.
I can go one worse than this as well. I was in a band in my late teens, early 20s, and the drummer was about 20 years older than the rest of us. So he was the one that had... I didn't actually pass my test till I was 22, but we'll get onto that later. He was the one that had the licence out of all of us. And we used to like to play a fun game on the way to gigs sometimes, which was... with some of our friends as well. So it's about 5 or 6 of us in the back of my old Volkswagen Transporter, and we played the game of see who can stand up and not fly from the back of the van to the front of the van as he approaches junctions and brakes. So we're on the way to the gig, and we're probably already drunk as well because we're teenagers.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're just... when we got out of the van, there was a divider in the van, a metal divider. On most of our faces, there were imprints of the holes between the metal divider where we'd gone slamming straight from the back, straight to the front. But it was great. We loved it. I wouldn't do it now. My back's too bad for that, but it was great at the time.
You do realise there may be some correlation between your back being bad now and the events you've just described.
Listen, back then, it was a problem for Future Will. Future Will is feeling it now, but... I still had fun, so
Future Will is full of regret.
Well, for many different reasons, but we'll just go with I had fun. Shouldn't have done it, but I had fun. Story of most of our teenage years, I'm sure.
But you know what? I just realised you didn't actually tell us what your first car was.
No, I didn't, did I?
No, you can't hide it any longer, James.
All right,
just put it out there.
HN05 YGT. Do you remember the reg number of the Corolla?
Oh no, not even in the slightest.
It's just quite a blokey thing, isn't it? Reg numbers. Like
I don't even remember them on Deo.
Wow, shame on you.
Yeah.
Ding.
You got to remember, I am like nearly 20 years older than both of you, so
no excuse. It was a Peugeot 407 diesel SW, which is the estate. 1.6, and I bought it for several reasons. I was living in London by that point. I had just graduated. I was going into the world of work. I needed something with some boot space because I was going to be carting film kit about. So an estate car was kind of the obvious choice. I went diesel because at that point in time, there was no punishment for being diesel. We're talking 2009, 2000, yeah, about 2009.
Apart from the shame.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. At that point, the way insurance companies worked for somebody of my age was it appeared to be basically £1 for every, cubic centimetre of capacity. So a 1.4 was 1,400 quid, a 1.6 was 1,600 quid, and a 2 litre was £2,000. And the petrol and diesel variants tended to have the same horsepower output, but the diesel considerably more torque. It was also a lot more economical, which of course did make a big difference. And so I went with this thing. It wasn't actually the most roomy. In fact, I think the major criticism of the 407, not a generally well-loved car, is the fact that the estate in it had less room than the back of a 307. But that didn't bother me because it did look a bit better and it was a bit nicer. And having recently driven a few 407s, the ride is really good. The suspension is very, very clever. It's like a multi-link arrangement at the front, I think, double wishbone at the rear. So it's a really, really nice thing. It was in Metropolitan Blue, which is kind of like a dark blue colour. And I found out this morning that it was actually exported, of all things, in 2016. So I suspect maybe somebody bought it that perhaps had a house in France or something like that, and then decided just to kind of keep it over there because the French MOT is, every 2 years as opposed to every year. I visited once a family in France, and they owned a Model T, which I drove. Ooh. And his treat to himself every 2 years was to take it in for the control technique. And the guys there would then give it to whoever the youngest lad in the workshop was. And he would then sit outside and roll his cigarette, and enjoy watching some poor, bewildered 21-year-old lad trying to work out how to start a Model T. And of course, none of the boys in the workshop would help him. And eventually they would admit that it was a death trap even when it was in perfect working order. So they just gave him a certificate and allowed him to carry on.
On the subject of that car, there is only one photo of it. Well, when it was in your possession, isn't that right?
There's a couple of photographs of it, but they're all accidental. So yeah, the one photograph that I definitely have, which I'll put on screen under duress, is in the background of a film shoot. Which actually, I didn't even tell you where that was. Do you
know? I know where it was.
You know where it was?
Yeah, because it was at the Ace Cafe.
It's at the Ace Cafe.
And I know that because when I had a meet at the Ace Cafe and you came down, we were having a little chat on camera during that particular vlog. And that was when you told me that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fond memories. A Super 16mm camera on a film shoot at the Ace Cafe. Like, life was good. I loved that car. But I then left London to move to where I am now, which is very rural by comparison, or rural by comparison to anywhere, really. And what happened was two things. First off, my insurance halved. And secondly, I then had open roads to enjoy. And so I figured that the safe, sensible, and logical thing would be to buy a car that had a bit more go in it and which could then safely get me past some of the rural traffic, which the Peugeot did struggle with a little bit. And I also used the impeccable logic of a 19 or 20-year-old that fuel at that point had jumped in price. We'd gone through a period, I think, that we only really matched recently where fuel jumped from being £1.10, £1.20 or something to £1.50 or £1.60 a litre. And my logic was that if it was going to cost me 80 or 90 quid to fill something, I at least want it to be something that I'm proud of. And the Peugeot wasn't that. So I bought my 2005 BMW 330 Ci Club Sport, which had a little bit of warranty on it, which I kind of used to negotiate a small loan from my grandmother because I was like, well, look, it's got a warranty on it. It's going to be much safer and nicer for me. Really, I was interested in the 3-litre straight-six engine, And it had it already had like 130,000 miles on it or something, which was the only way I could afford it because all of the others were way too expensive. And I bought that and absolutely loved it. And to this day, if the opportunity arose, I would buy that car back. It still exists. It's got, I think, about 200,000 miles on it now. Wow. But I had it for about 2 years, did about 40,000 miles. I had to put a starter motor on it, I think a battery, maybe I don't think it even had a bulb in it, actually, because it was xenons and LEDs. And it was brilliant.
The thing is about like the 330s, they in that time period they had the M54 engine by BMW, and that was renowned. It had some issues with VANS stuff, but overall it's renowned for being just one of the best BMW straight sixes they ever made. Yep. I had that in my E39 530i. It was so smooth, ran so well. It was just a great engine, Like I'd love to have something with that engine again as well, because it was just effortless performance, and it was really kind of refined as well.
Yeah, and I spent a long time trying to sort of chase the high, as it were, that car had given me. The next thing I actually had after that was a 645 Ci. And in some ways, you could tell it was a much more upmarket car. The interior was just a leap forward in terms of the materials and everything else. More technology as well in it. Had digital TV and all that. Because the 330 was a pretty fully loaded car. That had telly in it as well, but didn't work very well. The 6 Series worked a lot better. Looking back on it now, I am amazed that I got on with that car. I never even scratched it, because a 6 Series is not a small car. And I was taking it into London. And one of the reasons that I got it was, of course, it was a progression from the 3 Series, not only by being a 6, but by being a V8. And I'd been tempted to maybe try and buy a cheapy E46 M3, but I figured that back then the running costs were probably going to be ruinous. I settled on the 6 Series because it was sensational value. I mean, bearing in mind, the car at the time was, I think, about 8 or 9 years old, and it probably cost about 70 odd grand when it was new, and I picked it up for £7,250 from a bloke who was a chain smoker and smoked during the test drive, right? Oh. Which actually I was kind of fortunate for, because I think that's why nobody else had bought it. But it was actually a very nicely spec'd car. And what I did was I just drove it with the windows open for the next 3 weeks. And because it was nearly all leather in there, the smell of smoke just kind of went away.
I was going to say, how long did it take you to get the tar off the windscreen?
No, it was fine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was absolutely fine.
I don't know if you've been in cars with people that vape, and I'm sorry if you're a vapor, but there's always seems to be a film of this stuff everywhere. I'd much rather buy a car from somebody who smoked than vaped, personally.
Yeah, didn't have to deal with any of that. But yeah, it was great. It wasn't actually even dramatically juicier than the 3 Series. It certainly did drink a bit more, but petrol prices had calmed down a little bit. And because I used the car for work, there were two things about it. First off, if I was driving any distance, I was driving for work, so I was being paid mileage, and that covered my fuel cost. I remember one day I was on set, and one of the lads there, he just bought, I think it was a Polo, but it was, an absolute Bogo Povo spec Polo, 3-cylinder engine before they were cool, and like not a scrap of dead cow anywhere in it, like no options, no nothing. And he'd bought that brand new on finance, and it was costing him something like 200 quid a month or something like that. And I just bought the 6 Series, and I think the Polo was about 9 or 10 grand or something like that. It wasn't a particularly expensive car, RRP. And he looked at my car and was like, oh my God, how can you afford that? And I looked at his car and went, oh my God, how can you afford that? Because the difference was, if I didn't get work, my car didn't cost me anything because it just sat there. Whereas he had to find 200 quid a month to pay for his car, regardless of what happened. The other thing about the 6 Series is it has an enormous boot, but you can't see it from the outside. My insurance only covered stuff if you couldn't see it. So estate cars with the luggage, the parcel shelf out, didn't count. If it's on show, it's uninsured. And at some points in time, I had 100 grand of film kit in the back of the 6 Series. But nobody would think a 6 Series would have anything expensive in it. Vans get broken into for fun. That's one of the reasons that I sort of didn't have one for a very, very long time.
Well, it's interesting you mention that. That's one of the reasons why I removed the rear window protection guard things from my Vans, because I was like, people are going to be very disappointed when they find out there's literally nothing in there. I never keep anything in there. And all I'm going to have to do is replace a door or replace a window. So at least if they can see in and go, oh, there's nothing, I won't get broken into. And it never got broken into, which was quite nice because of that.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, my one and only vehicle was a Peugeot 207 van with a 1.4 litre diesel engine, no air conditioning, which is probably just as well, because the 70 lazy French horses that it had were barely adequate to get the thing up to speed. No matter how harshly and aggressively I drove it, it would do 55 to the gallon. Everywhere, absolutely everywhere. But that was actually great fun. And again, there's something about vans. Like, I remember talking to a chap who was going to, I think he was selling burgers on the side of the road, and he was going to go into selling vans. And he said, one of the reasons I want to sell vans and not cars is because I don't have to fix them if someone dents them. Like, you sell a van with dents on because it's going to get dented again. Nobody cares.
Oh, this is great. In 2020, when we replaced our Volkswagen Transporter, we bought a VW Caddy van, and I think you may have seen it. I can't remember if you have. But that also had like no lacquer on it. The paint was absolutely knackered, had a couple of dents. We didn't care. It was a van. So same kind of thing. We just drove it. And the person who bought it when I sold it a few months ago didn't even make any comments on the paint or dent. They just bought it because it was a van.
Yeah. And you know that expression of, it's better to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow. The ultimate expression of that is a van.
Oh, absolutely. That Transporter I had maybe 68 horsepower on a good day when it was new. And obviously it was a big vehicle as well. So
yeah, the Transporter's a proper size.
Yeah, I once managed to get it up to 80 miles an hour, and I've never been prouder. Because that thing was so horrendously slow that to get it down there, and I wasn't even going downhill. I couldn't believe my luck. I mean, the temperature gauge was almost pegged. Let's not worry about that too much. But it was a good day that day.
You guys love your vans, and I want to go back to a phrase that you used a little bit earlier, James. You said 3-cylinder engines until they were cool. I mean, I can think of two cool cars that have 3-cylinder engines, but that's it.
Well, they've come back into fashion, haven't they? I don't actually mind a 3-pot. They're a bit gruff. They've got an interesting sound about them. BMW i8, that's a cool 3-pot.
Okay, all right. I can think of 3 cool cars then.
Oh, what are the other 2?
Well, I don't know if they're still going to do it with this particular engine, but the Koenigsegg Gemera,
I don't think that's happening.
The 3-cylinder.
Yeah.
All right, they're going to go stick with the V8.
Well, I suspect, I don't know, I could be wrong here, and this is the joy of this kind of thing, isn't it? We started off talking about old knackered Corolla liftbacks, and here we are talking about the Gemera already. This is how things escalate.
I just wanted to get us off this topic of vans.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's good of you to talk about, stuff for the common man with, the 4-door Koenigsegg. Or 4-seat, isn't it? Sorry, it's not 4-door, I don't think.
No, it is.
Is it 4-door?
I'm pretty sure.
It's a good looking thing.
Actually, no, it's not. It's got the, it's 4-seater. Yeah. Very long.
I don't know. I mean, because I don't really follow the world of Koenigsegg that much. I have a suspicion that 3-cylinder, it's the free valve engine, isn't it?
Yep.
The really clever timing technology. I suspect they're having trouble getting that working because I think it's very, very difficult to make it work. And they offered the V8 as an... Who spends 2 and a bit or whatever £1 million that it is to get one of these and is like, you know what? Can I have the small engine, please? As soon as the option of the V8 was there, I suspect they did it because then all of their customers would go, actually, can we have the V8, please? Thank you very much. And then they would go, oh, there's no demand for the 3-cylinder anymore. I guess there's no point. I don't know. That's my thinking. Okay, what's the other one?
I've got one.
Go on.
Yeah.
Dacia Sandero.
They do have a 3-pot.
Yeah, the Sandero. I had a 2019 Sandero with a 3-cylinder, the 0.9 TCE engine that was in the Renaults at the time. And the reason I think it is cool, because if you this is really loutish and stupid, I shouldn't have done it, I know better, but I did. If you fit to the kind of the diverter valve system, a block-off plate, you can make the turbo do the absolute most incredible turbo flutter as it's going back through the vanes. So you'll be changing gear with this Dacia Sandero, and it goes, what? and it's loud. People are looking down the street like, did that come from that? And other people are like, what was that noise? And I'm like, yes, that is me.
See, you know what? Stuff like that, I know it's childish.
Yes.
But actually, it does give me the greatest sense of joy because, we're lucky now that we get to tart around with other stuff. Ant and I are both very fortunate that we've now got some, very nice cars. But somewhere out there is another 17-year-old Ant or James or Will who has got their Dacia and has done that because that's the car that they've got that they can afford. Maybe Nan left it to them. Budget is limited, but with a little bit of ingenuity and on occasional mechanical recklessness, they can make it sound like something from the Fast and the Furious.
Do you want to know how I really, really did it? There's a piano stand over there, and if you notice, it hasn't got any rubber feet on it. What I figured out was, you're going to like this, is the rubber feet would go perfectly into the hole where the kind of like the diverter, the recirculation to send like the excess boost back in the intake would go. And I used the foot of a piano to block that off, so it would go.
Oh my word.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I never told the garage I traded it into that we did that with it. For good reason, obviously.
Oh no, my E46, like all of the mods for it have funny names. The two I remember, there's the Golf T mod because that had a valved exhaust, and if you it's a vacuum operated system. So if you catch it at the right point, stick a Golf T in the end of it, it just holds the vacuum all the time, and that means the exhaust valve is just stuck open.
Yeah.
Which just makes it sound quite a bit throatier at idle. But the other is the tennis ball mod. So it had the optional Harman Kardon stereo, which actually was rubbish, and it had one of those sort of flat subwoofers that was mounted in the top of the boot, and it didn't generate much bass, but it did generate enough bass to rattle the parcel shelf whenever it tried. And so what you did was you took the subwoofer out, stuffed a bunch of tennis balls up there, so that it would basically wedge itself in, and then you put the subwoofer back, and then the parcel shelf would stop rattling. So if ever at some point some poor bugger tries to take the subwoofer out of my old E46, they're going to get attacked by a bunch of tennis balls. And they're going to, if they don't know those cars, they're going to be very, very confused as to what they're doing up there.
I've just, learned to live with the fact that the dashboard on my 23-year-old Volkswagen Golf just rattles. You drove it for the first time the other day, and I think your exact words are, why is it so rattly?
It is quite rattly.
Yeah.
Like for a VW product, from an era when VW actually was still building like stuff properly, it did struggle.
I think it's the airbag rattling. The dashboard airbag. Because what happens
the Audi wheel that you've got in it.
Well, listen, I think I said to you, I don't like thick-rimmed steering wheels. The only option to change it to was a sport wheel, a three-spoke sport wheel from the GTIs, and I didn't really like the look of that or the feel of that. So I went online and thought, what fits onto this? Because a lot of common Mark IV platform and chassis bits will bolt onto the car. And I was like, well, I could get this wheel from an Audi A3. And I did. It was like 20 quid delivered as well. It was cheap, and it's leather wrapped, and it feels nice. And I suppose it goes with the 18-inch Audi TT wheels that I've thrown on there, which I don't think you're also a fan of either.
No, I'm not. First off, because they're Audi wheels on a VW, and it's a very scene thing of you to do. But also, they're really heavy, and they haven't got much profile in the tyre.
No.
And our roads are not great.
No, they're not. This is becoming a bone of contention with me as well. I am getting older and things hurt more. So when I get in the car, it does bounce about and do things like that. And it.
Well, you know, of the three of us, the one that likes the crashiest, firmest ride.
It wasn't me.
It's definitely him.
I love it though. I mean, I just don't. It's just boring otherwise. Like, I want to drive down the road, and like if I'm not bouncing up and down, then the suspension is way too soft. I love it. It's just that race car for the road feel.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is, race cars are great on a race track.
I know, and I want that experience, and I don't care. I love it.
I had my eyes opened by Lotus because when I first test drove an Evora, I found myself driving it with greater speed because I had greater confidence. bearing in mind I'd only been in the car for 5 minutes, and I drove it with more enthusiasm than the M3 that I'd owned for about 18 months, simply because the Lotus told me what was going on and made me realise, yes, we'll get through this bend absolutely fine. Yes, you've got grip. Yes, you're fine. And the chassis in a Lotus was set up so well that you could basically boot it through any undulation, through any bend, and it had the suspension travel to cope with it. Whereas some of the modern supercars that we drive now, you have to go slower than the Lotus simply because the thing is going to smack the ground. And even if it doesn't really do that much damage, it doesn't sound very nice when it does it.
Oh yeah, bottoming out is like the worst thing in the world. But look, at the end of the day, the suspension should be hard enough that you minimise roll, etc., but compliant enough that it can absorb the fast bumps. But I'm not there to set lap times on a public road. I'm there to have an experience. So part of that experience for me is, the car feeling as sporty as possible. And a part of that is stiffer suspension. Now, I do think the worst of my 4 cars is definitely the Lamborghini. That's pretty bad.
Worse than the Z?
Yeah, I know the Z. Well, the Z's on KWV3s, and that's been tuned. So I've got the damping rates all tuned nicely. So it's quite stiff, but it absorbs it a bit more. In fact, the Z and the RHET, the suspension feel between those is kind of quite similar.
Yeah, I give you that.
So I aimed to try and get it to be as usable as possible, but at the same time still be relatively stiff. But it's the quality of the KW dampers more than anything else that takes care of that.
Yeah.
The Gallardo, it's like the dampers. Well, does it even have dampers? Is what I wonder, because there's some spring movement and it just stops, and that's it.
Yeah, that's quite a Lamborghini thing. It's a more modern Lamborghini thing.
I like it.
There's a lot of people out there that now just think harsh ride equals sporty. And it's like,
yes.
No, it's not.
Yes,
no.
it's fun.
No.
It's fun. I enjoy it.
I'm just going to be honest with you. I've got eBay coilovers on my car.
Oh God! As long as it's not max peding rods.
No, they're Stance Plus. they're one step above. They're one step above. I don't know why I do it to myself, but the problem I have is, and I think it comes about, I was a real stance boy back there. I was real VWC, and if it wasn't low, I wasn't interested.
Did you cut your springs?
Do you know what? No, I never cut my springs, I'll be honest. Even though I am a colossal idiot, I was never that much of a colossal idiot.
Fair enough.
But no, it is on coilovers, and this is how I know I'm getting out of it. I had to raise it up. I've had to raise it up. I've only raised it up by about a finger's width, but I have had to raise it up because I was driving to Stowmarket the other day, and every single corner I took, as the drive shaft was hitting the anti-roll bar, and as the tyre was actually doing its best to release the front wings from existence, so I had to raise it up a little bit. I have actually been, and this might shock you, I've kind of been thinking about returning it back to standard.
And so you should.
Yeah, but then it won't look cool.
It's doomed from the outset. It's a Golf Estate in silver.
Yeah, but
do you know what you'd really like? I think you'd really get on with.
What's that?
The Passat R36.
Yeah, I think I saw you did a video on that, didn't you?
Yeah.
I remember seeing that and thinking, I like that.
Yeah, they're cool.
That's a bit of you, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is. I don't know. It's the problem is I sold my van. It's my only practical vehicle as well. So
yeah, see, you need at least. I mean, I should really follow my own advice here. You do need one vehicle that you can rely upon, and that you can use as your do everything, go anywhere type vehicle. And I think a bit of comfort is not a bad thing.
yeah, I do think the worst bit is the wheels. I remember when I first put them on, I was amazed at how much the car wanted to start wandering over the road. I just thought, it's got quite grippy tyres on them. It had some Bridgestones on them, which probably had no kind of like job, no reason to be on tyres like that on the car it was originally on. But it does like to follow the road a lot. And
I do worry about like the size of wheels on cars now, although it's not always quite as extreme as it seems, because a few years back we seem to have a jump in the rolling diameter of the tyres as well. So when you look at some cars now and they've got like 21s on, they don't actually look as silly as they might seem.
Going back to that Cupra Born, it had quite big wheels on it, but I think it had quite a bit of sidewall in it, didn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
So it wasn't. It rode better than my car.
I think the new Revuelto has got 22s on the rear, 21s on the front, 22s on the rear.
A base 911 is now 2021s.
Crazy.
I mean, so you're talking earlier. So when you had your first Mondeo,
That was 16s.
the current Ferrari flagship of the day would be the F512M, which is an ugly, ugly Ferrari. That had the largest wheels fitted to any production car at the time.
Let me guess, it was 18s.
18s.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, my mum at one point had a 911 993 Targa, and that had upgrade wheels as standard as part of the Targa. They were 17s. And when she had that about 11, 12 years ago, it was already then difficult to find good tyres for it. And one of the problems I had with the 550, everyone always asks me about how expensive it is to get tyres for the F12. And I don't know why they do that. I mean, because actually it's really easy. Like, I can get those tyres, no problem. They're 20s on it. And I've got loads of choice. The 550, though, the front is like a 255, I think, 40 18s or 255, 35 18s or something like that. But the rear are 295 wide 18s.
Wow.
And that's a really, really uncommon size. So at any point in time, there might only be perhaps 2 or 3 tyres that are available. And of course, you want it to match the fronts. And yeah, so I actually wind up at some point, I'm going to have to start shopping for tyres because the ones on it are nearly 5 years old now. They've got loads of tread, but they're nearly 5 years old. I'll have to start shopping in advance to get the right tyres. Especially if you want to be picky and put something specific on there. You might find actually they don't make this anymore, or they make it only every now and again. I didn't buy a Lotus Esprit. I nearly bought an Esprit Sport 300 because the rear tyres on it was something obscene, like 315 wide 17s.
What?
And as far as I can tell, it's probably the only car to ever have those tyres on it. And I found a listing for them at £5,000 each.
Wow.
Was that for a new tyre or new old stock?
Well, the problem was that listing was then just showing discontinued. So they'd been £5,000 when you could get them.
Wow.
But you couldn't get them anymore. And so I didn't buy that car because if you changed the wheels on that car, it wouldn't look right. It would look completely wrong. The whole point of that car is it's like, if you change the wheels on a Countach or something, it would just look wrong.
Yep.
So I was like, and the car was advertised as coming with a spare set of tyres. And you just think, well, yeah, what good is a spare set of tyres if they're 10 years old? And I even spoke to a couple of tyre manufacturers and said, like, how much would it really cost me to get a custom-made set of tyres? And the response from all of them was, you don't even want to know, because the amount of effort it would take them. And, of course, they only made 60 of these cars ever. I know there's at least one gone because somebody showed me a picture of his dad's that burnt to the ground. And they don't get driven. So you couldn't even be like, okay, well, we're going to get a group buy if we can promise we're going to order 50 sets. And then maybe at that point, it would be economically viable, but no.
Well, just as well, it's not a Formula One car, because my mate, who's got a Formula One car, he had to buy a new set of magnesium wheels for his car, and they only sell them in a minimum of 12 sets at a time.
Oh.
And they are bespoke to each team. So,
oh, no.
Yeah. So, because the original mag wheels, because of the way that they make them, over a period of time, they actually start to deteriorate.
Yeah.
And you can't really trust them at 210
They get water in them,
miles.
don't they, I think?
I don't remember, but they basically, the material degrades and you can no longer trust them at those speeds. So, so obviously he had the rights to the wheels with the specific fitment for the BAR, and but they couldn't do anything less than 12 sets, not 12 wheels, 12 sets.
And the painful thing about that is you're like, okay, you want a set for the car, you want a spare set for the car, you're going to have 10 sets of wheels that are going to sit there, and after 10, 15 years, they're also going to just be ornaments.
Yeah, and there's probably only maybe about 3 cars in the world that they will actually fit on, and he owns 2 of them.
Oh, that's
So,
painful. I
yeah,
expect
it
the
was.
tyres are probably not actually that bad because I imagine it's just it's a regulation thing, isn't it? So you just get.
I'm not sure. I think for the size of the rims, because the rims have stayed static for quite a long
Was it
time.
13s or something, wasn't it? For
Yeah,
a long,
for a
long time.
long time. Was it last year or the year before last that they changed the 18s?
Yeah.
And that was only for marketing purposes, not for any other good reason. But yeah. Right, look, do we need to finish up on any more cars? Because I want to mention my Mark II Mondeo. And
I've got to hear about this Mondeo and then we'll wrap up.
And I only want to mention it because it was the first car that I could ever afford to buy brand new from a dealership.
Okay.
And I've only ever bought 2 brand new cars in my life because I didn't learn the lesson the first time, but I did learn the lesson the second time. And but I fell in love with the Mark I Mondeo so much that when the Mark II came out, I actually thought it was horrible. I went to the British Motor Show, took my son there, and actually, no, it wasn't my son. It was before my son was born. It was 1997, the 97 show. And I saw that they had the Mark II with the horrible front headlights, but it had the RS body kit on it, and it was the saloon version. I was not a fan of the hatchback versions. My first one was the saloon. I wanted the saloon, but with the RS body kit. So I went to my local Ford dealership and said, well, look, I want the Mark II, but I want the ST24 2.5 litre Duratec V6. And it was very cool at the time as far as I was concerned. And they wouldn't even let me test drive one. And I'm like, but mate, I'm going to spend 20 grand. This is in 1998. Wouldn't even let me test drive it. So eventually I found another dealership that was about 40 minutes away, ended up calling them and saying, look, I really want to just drive this car just to be sure I really like it. And they said, yeah, no problem, come up. Yeah, we've got one. Went up there, drove it. And then I said, right, I want it. RS body kit, saloon. And they went, oh, you can't get the RS body kit on the saloon. I said, they showed it at the British Motor Show. It was on display. Oh. And they were like, nope, can't order the RS body kit with the saloon version. I went, all right, well, I'm not interested. And I left. 3 weeks later, I got a phone call. We found your car. I'm like, what do you mean you found my car? Because I wanted it in red. It had to be in red because my first one was red.
Yep.
And it had to be in red, and it had to have the RS body kit, and it had to be a saloon. And they said, just come up and see us. We'll show you the car. If you like it, we'll do a deal. I went, okay. So I went up there, and they literally had my car spec'd exactly how I wanted it. So as soon as I got it, I said, right, I bought a set of I-back lowering springs. They went on immediately. And then I had all these plans for the car, but then, I don't know, this minor little issue of a divorce happened. That kind of got in the way of me spending any more money. But I absolutely loved that car, and I kept it for about 8 years until eventually I then traded it in because it was worth nothing. Traded it in for my 350Z, and that started the current era of cars.
Was that at the Earls Court or the NEC?
Earls Court.
So it might be about that year, won't be much later, but I went with Dad to the motor show at the NEC. And at the time, I think he'd just bought his 355. And he was thinking about buying a Porsche, probably a 911 of some description. He did it the wrong way around. He bought a Ferrari and then got Porsches later. And, you know, because back in the day, you know, old Ferraris were cheaper Ferraris. So his first Ferrari was a 328 because he was thinking of buying, I think, a 968. And then I think I wound up buying an M3 and basically decided that actually he'd buy the old Ferrari because it was the same money as a new Porsche. You know. Anyway, he took us to the motor show because the Porsche dealer had said, oh, come to the motor show. We're trying to entice you into buying a car. We'll get you on the stand. And of course, you know, in the 90s, they spent a lot of money on these stands. And we were there. And I was like, Dad, we're at the motor show. There's a car I have to see because it's like the best car in the whole world. And I'd only ever seen it in Gran Turismo. And I'm like, Dad, never mind these Porsches, they're rubbish. And sod your Ferrari, right? I've got to take you to this car. So I dragged my father off the Porsche stand where he was being, you know, basically wined and dined by them, you know, having his arm twisted into buying a car. And I took him over to the Mitsubishi stand.
Oh, yes.
Where they had a 3000 GT.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever seen my father less impressed. When I was like, Dad, can we sell the Ferrari and get one of these? And he just went, no. I was so crestfallen. I was like, oh, but Dad, it's the best thing ever. I know it is because I've got it in my video game.
Probably a good result. Actually, who do we know actually owned one of those? Was it Ben?
Yeah, I think he did have one.
Yep.
He did have one. I
Yep.
remember the import, the GTO. And to this day, it's one of these cars where I'm like, oh, I really want one, but also all I ever see is the horror stories of how they go wrong.
I think it's actually interesting how video games, especially when we're younger, and as car people, like the original Need for Speeds and things like that, really influence our kind of love for cars. I don't know if you found that, because
I have, and that is going to be the topic for our next installment.
oh, it's going to
Yeah.
get exciting.
It is. So a big thank you to everybody for listening. I have been James. To my left, we have Ant. To my right, we have Will. We want to thank you all for joining us here at the Radiator Arms. Please hit the subscribe button by whatever medium you're listening to us on. And we will see you for the next installment.
See you later.
Bye.